In 1630, John Winthrop delivered a sermon in which he famously delivered the line, "We shall be as a city on the hill." In his historical context, he's talking to the settlers of New England, the northeastern part of the United States. And in a sense, he was essentially saying that Massachusetts Bay would be an example to the world of what it means to live in accordance to the will of God, and that this land would be a land in which freedom would be utilized for people to give God the worship that he deserves. Why was this the dream that Winthrop had when talking about the conception of the American dream? Well, in light of all of the events taking place historically, the Reformation and the soon-to-be Enlightenment, and all of the political and historical events that were taking place in Europe, my guess is that the settlers simply wanted a land in which they could worship God freely. In his sermon, he made the following 3 points that I'm going to briefly summarize. The first point being that God made the world with all kinds of different things. God gave everyone different gifts to different people, and he expects us to use those gifts to bring glory to him, and then secondly, to help others flourish in the life that they are going to live. This shows off, for one thing, the goodness of God, because it shows that everyone plays a part in the cosmic story of purpose, life, meaning, truth, goodness, and beauty. The second point he makes is that God made things with the intent of having a uniqueness among creation so that he could show how his spirit works differently in different people. God uses good people and their circumstances to bring out good qualities in those individuals and those around them. Rich and powerful people can practice virtue by showing kindness and self-control, and inadvertently, that same inclination to virtue parallels with how poor people experience or practice virtue by showing faith, patience, and obedience in light of their circumstances. Everyone gets a chance to grow in this life through their situation, and they get a chance to incline their will to the will of the source of truth, goodness, and beauty, that being God. The third point he made was that God made people different from each other so that we could all need one another. This helps us become closer, like a big family. No one is given wealth or power just for themselves, though people can abuse it for that purpose. These things, these gifts that we receive, are meant to be for the good of everyone, and they're meant to honor God. So no matter how rich or poor we are, it's important to remember that everything that we have belongs to something else, that being God, because from God, goodness emanates. And so we should use our gifts and our circumstances to help others incline their will to the will of a good, true, and beautiful world. And in so doing, we honor the source of that true, good, and beautiful world because, again, truth, goodness, and beauty comes from God. And so Winthrop is basically trying to say that God made us all different for a reason, and we should utilize those differences to take care of each other and to honor God. Now, these are good intentions, but why is this doomed to fall? Why is it that the vision set for America in that statement that we shall be as a city on the hill seems so distant and so far off and unreachable? How did America go from being the symbolic city on a hill referenced in the Gospel of Matthew to the next Tower of Babel? In the Gospels, according to Matthew in chapter 5, during the Sermon on the Mount, we can see where Winthrop gets his idea for the city on the hill. In chapter 5, during the sermon, Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. If salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." There is a lot to unpack there, admittedly, but let's focus on the salt and the light metaphor. The salt is a reference to taste, and the light is a reference to what we can see. In matters of the spiritual life, Jesus is essentially trying to say that we are to be the salt and the light of the world. In other words, we are to be the kind of people in whom others can taste and see the vision of the kingdom of God. That is and was the goal of the settlers, and the goal and vision of Winthrop. And that is the purpose of the American dream at its root and at its core. And the American dream, while many may think that its spirit is centered on ambition and individualism, that's a little superficial and pretty hollow. It's actually rooted in precisely what Winthrop is trying to pose, that we should have the capacity and the freedom to worship God as He deserves. And so, the big issue now that we see throughout the 20th and 21st century is that we forgot what that looks like, for one main reason, that being that we have turned our freedom from a means of how to glorify God, our source of truth, goodness, and beauty, into the ambition of making a name for ourselves. And this resembles the Tower of Babel perfectly. In Genesis 11 we read, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built, and the Lord said, Behold, they are one. They have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there, confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city, and therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth. The story of Babel is not exclusive to America. It's actually quite a prelude to how all human ambition tends to create strife and trouble, whether that ambition has good intentions or not. While America has supposedly began as a city to be built with the desire and purpose to create a land in which one can worship God freely, it is now a land that places high priority, almost primary priority, towards self-advancement, self-individualism, and pride in one's own legacy. And so, rather than there being a collective effort to put ambitions in the direction of glorifying God and inclining our wills to the wills of virtue and profundity and wisdom, we no longer see the need to adhere to our main purpose, not just as a country, but as a world, as spiritual beings. Everything that we do is done with the intent to glorify ourselves rather than our source of truth, goodness, and beauty, which is not us. In America, we have so many freedoms, unlike many other nations, and with that freedom, we have descended into chaos, just like the people of Babel. No one can properly decide how to orient the country's political, cultural, or economic structures such that each individual has a higher chance of inclining their will to the will of Christ, because we've deemed God irrelevant. And so we think we can structure our culture, politics, and economy based on trying to appease each desire and whim and will of every individual person, rather than creating a system that allows a person to align themselves with the source of truth, goodness, and beauty, that being God. And so, now, our focus as an American dream is simply to get people through life so that they can simply die. And as the years go by, our achievements are no longer an endeavor to glorify God, but to advance our own cause as individuals, which pits us against those whom their advancements depend on the failure of our own, which is a spiritual theme embedded within the Tower of Babel narrative. In short, this being that we desire to make a name for ourselves by being the person who builds the tower that reaches to the heavens, right? Creating a heaven on earth. It's not just enough that we have heaven on earth, but that we want to be the one to do it and get all the credit. That's the foolishness. That's the unbridled ambition of the story of Babel, and that's the unbridled ambition of the pride of America today, at least a secular America. And so, because each of us want to be the person that contributes the most or is the one that creates this tower that reaches the heavens, we squabble with others whom are trying to do the same, and so we are left with the culture war that we are fighting today. The city on the hill that Winthrop alludes to when it comes to the conception of the birth of America and the American dream, as much as it was intended to be a reference to the greatness and the example America was to set for the world, it has no longer become that city on a hill, but rather a collection of towers of Babel. We no longer think about how we can be a salt and light, a taste and vision of God's kingdom, the kingdom of truth, goodness, and beauty, but rather a salt and light of our own ambitions, giving people a taste and a vision of ourselves, our own lives, and our own ambitions. America has lost its primary purpose to be a land in which man can freely live for God, the source of truth, goodness, and beauty, and now its purpose is to impose a societal structure of what people think the Constitution says in regard to life, liberty, and happiness. The great American dream is genuinely reduced to who can better interpret the Constitution. The American dream is now just a futile and sad effort to claim control over a piece of paper rather than its intended transcendental purpose to be a land in which people can incline their will to the highest source of spirituality, to its highest source of truth, goodness, and beauty. I want to apologize for speaking broadly. I'm kind of more doing this quickly to understand, for my own purposes, the culture war in America and why we're seemingly having a huge identity crisis. But wherever you stand, politically, culturally, or economically, it's pretty difficult to deny that we're having an identity crisis, that we're having a culture war. America is very much a squabbling group of divided people trying to decide right and wrong, and the only thing that will unite us is not going to be some political, economic, or social movement, but a transcendental, spiritual, and universal awakening of each person living with an intentional effort to be the salt and light of the earth. There must be an individual and collective movement that provides to others an experience that gives them a taste and a vision of the kingdom of God. To me, that's probably how we are going to fix America, and how that will unfold is beyond me. Now, if you ask me how that will unfold and what that looks like fully, even within Christianity, we kind of have our own little Tower of Babel situation going on. I obviously think the Catholic Church is the one true church that Jesus Christ started. And so if there is going to be any kind of a reform, it's going to be a mass conversion, not just into Christianity, but further into Catholicism. And to some extent, the Eastern Orthodox churches too. I think that, despite the divide between the East and the West in that regard, that if there's ever going to be unity within Christianity, it's going to be among the two big apostolic churches, the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic. But for now, there's no need to get into that. I think that in terms of the culture, or in terms of the social, cultural, and political strife that's happening within the country, understanding that we're trying to solve a spiritual problem with secular solutions, and it's going to fail. So, with that, there's really no need to go any further for now. Till my next video, God bless, and get out there and make better. Happen daily.